thank you very much. You know you're getting old when you approach the podium and someone asks you, can you step up there? Well, you know, I know you're getting old when you don't want to sit down because you have to get back up again. But it's a real honor, a pleasure to be here at the Harvard Club, especially as a Yalie. But, you know, I could have been a Harvard person very easily because I made my decision about what college to attend as a high schooler in Detroit. I had enough money to apply to one school. So I said, I'm going to apply to the school that wins the grand championship in College Bowl this year. And the grand championship that year was between Harvard and Yale. And Yale demolished Harvard, so I didn't want to go to school with a bunch of dummies. Just kidding, some of my best friends are Harvard people. But I want to talk a little bit today about the American dream, because there are many who are stating that the American dream doesn't exist anymore, or that it doesn't exist for certain segments of our society. And I'm not sure that that's true. It has been dampened somewhat, there's no question about that. But I believe a lot of that dampening comes from the distortion of who we are as a nation. America is an incredible place. You know, my wife and I have visited 68 countries. We have lived overseas, and I can tell you there's no place like the country that we have, and that's why it's so important that we fight to keep it a land of opportunity and a land of dreams. You know, the people who say that we're systemically racist and are unfair to all kinds of people, if we were so bad, why are all these people trying to get in here? So, obviously it's not that bad. But you think back to the founders of this nation. They were very smart people. A lot of very young people too, by the way. But they actually analyzed the governmental systems that existed in every society in the history of the world. And they were eclectics. They took the good stuff, and they left the bad stuff out. Their attempt was to create a society that remained free. One of the things that they realized in their analysis is that all governments move in the same direction. They grow, they infiltrate, and they dominate. Doesn't matter how they start and what lofty goals they have, that's what they do. So how could they create a system that would not do that? And it was a terrible fight, and they had a hard time agreeing. Those of you who are history buffs know that in the last Constitutional Convention, the whole thing almost fell apart. They were going to just go their separate ways and say, forget about it. And then the elder statesman, 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin, stood up before the assembly and he said, gentlemen, stop. He says, let's get down on our knees and let's seek wisdom from our Creator. And they knelt down and prayed, and they got up and they put together our Constitution, which I believe was divinely inspired. But when Franklin came out of the hall, he was asked by a woman, sir, what do we have here? A monarchy or a republic? And he famously said, a republic, if you can keep it. If you can keep it. We've kept it for over 240 years. We're closer to losing it now than we ever have been. And when you look at all the strife and the hatred that is going on in our country right now, and you look at the strife and hatred that exists in other places in the world, and you wonder, are we approaching a place where we're like that too? where we hate each other based on identity groups as opposed to who we are as individuals. Think about it. But you know, my dream as an American, my American dream was to be a doctor. I loved medicine from the time I was a little kid. Anything that had to do with medicine, I was all over it. Dr. Kildare, Dr. Casey, man, I just love that stuff. I even like going to the doctor's office. And I would gladly have a shot just so I could smell the alcohol swabs. Just anything that had to do with medicine. Maybe not a COVID shot. But I just wanted to be around medicine. And initially, I heard stories about missionary doctors in church, and they seemed like such noble people, traveling all over the world, great personal sacrifice to bring not only physical but mental and spiritual healing to people. They seemed like the most noble people on the face of the earth. I decided when I was 8 years old that I was going to be a missionary doctor. And that was my dream until I was 13. At which time, having grown up in dire poverty, I decided I'd rather be rich. So at that point, missionary doctor was out and psychiatrist was in. Now, I didn't know any psychiatrists, but on TV they seemed like rich people. They drove Jaguars, they had these plush offices and these fancy mansions, and all they had to do was talk to crazy people all day. And it seemed like I was doing that anyway, so I said, this is going to work out extremely well. And I started reading Psychology Today. I was the local shrink in high school. Everybody brought me their problems. I would sit them down and stroke my chin, say, tell me about your mama. And I majored in psychology at Yale. I had some incredible professors, including Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud's daughter. And I was all gung-ho. I was going to be this great psychoanalyst. But then I got to medical school, and I started meeting a bunch of psychiatrists. No, I'm just kidding. No, what really happened is I started listening to the neurosurgeons and some of those lectures they gave, the things that they were able to do with the brain and the spinal cord. I was just mesmerized. I just said, this is what I'm going to do. And I started moving in that direction. And people were saying, no, not neurosurgery. You don't want to do neurosurgery. At that time, there had been 8 black neurosurgeons in the world. But I'll tell you a secret, God does not dispense talent based on race. And it seemed just so perfect for me. And I initially became an adult neurosurgeon. But I quickly discovered that no matter how good an operation you did on those chronic back pain patients, they never got any better until they got their settlement. Whereas with the kids, what you see is what you get. You know, when they feel good, you know they feel good. When they feel bad, you know they feel bad. And there's no secondary agendas. And you can operate on a kid for 10, 15, 20, 30 hours. And if you're successful, the reward may be 50, 60, 70, 80 years of life. Whereas with an old geezer, you spend all that time operating and they die in 5 years of something else. So I like to get a big return on my investment. But I like old people. I'm one of them now. But it was so gratifying to be able to intervene in people's lives. You know, I was in the airport in Austin, Texas, and a man came running up to me and he said, Dr. Carson, you won't remember me, but 30 years ago, you operated on my 3-year-old daughter. She had a malignant brain tumor. Everybody said she was going to die, and last week we celebrated her 33rd birthday. You know, those are the kinds of things that really charge your batteries. And you know, yes, there were a lot of things that I did that made the headlines, but I was just as pleased fixing somebody's shunt who had developed intracranial pressure problems. That wasn't considered a big fancy operation, but for that person, it meant the difference between life and death. And those are the kinds of things that really make the difference. But there was a big problem for me in terms of realizing my dream, and that is I wasn't a good student. I was a terrible student. You got to be a good student to get into medical school. And my nickname was Dummy. That's what everybody called me. The teachers thought I was stupid. My classmates thought I was stupid. I thought I was stupid. The only person who didn't think I was stupid was my mother. She would always say, Benjamin, you're much too bright to be bringing home grades like this. I brought them home anyway, but she always said that. And she always had something positive to say. And she was by far the most influential force in my life. You know, she came from a huge rural family and was shuffled from home to home, never had a place of stability, got less than a third grade education, got married at age 13. And my father was much older than she was. They moved to Detroit. And he was a factory worker and a part-time preacher. She discovered some years later that he was also a bigamist, had another family. I remember telling that story at a graduation at the University of Utah, and nobody thought it was that strange. But she obviously thought it was pretty strange, and there was a divorce, and we were homeless for a while, but then some relatives in Boston took us in. And they lived in a typical tenement, large multi-family dwelling, boarded up windows and doors, sirens and gangs, giant roaches and rats all over the place, a lot of violence. Both of my older cousins, who we adored, were killed. That was the environment. And my mother was out working 2 and 3 jobs at a time as a domestic because she didn't like the idea of welfare. She wanted to be independent. And she figured if she worked hard enough, she could do that. And after a couple of years, we were able to move back to Detroit. And I was a 5th grader, and I was a terrible, terrible student. But I admired the smart kids. I would never tell the smart kids that I admired them, but I was always saying, how can that kid, who's the same age as me, know all this stuff? And there was one kid in particular, his name was Steve. He was the smartest kid in the class. You guys probably identify with him greatly. And he would always come up to you after a test and hold his A in your face and say, let me see yours, let me see yours. You want to let him see it, all right. But he was very irritating in that sense. But, you know, my mother was just so horrified that I wasn't doing well in school and my brother wasn't doing well because of the life that she led, the fact that she couldn't get many opportunities because she didn't have any education. And she didn't know what to do, and she prayed for wisdom, and God gave her the wisdom, at least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was that wise because it was to turn off the TV and make us read books and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. You know, she would put highlights and underlines, and we would think she was reading them, but she wasn't. But I hated reading those books. I wanted to be watching TV like everybody else and having fun. But after a while, I actually began to enjoy reading the books because we were desperately poor, but between the covers of those books, I could go anywhere, I could be anybody, I could do anything. I started reading about entrepreneurs and scientists and surgeons and philosophers, and I began to realize that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you is you. It's not somebody else. It's not some circumstance. And I just stopped listening to all the negative people who were saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, and the society's against you, and I just threw all that stuff right in the garbage and just started thinking about what I could do. And my brother did the same thing. And my mother was criticized. Her friends were saying, you can't make boys stay in the house, read books, they'll grow up and they'll hate you. And I would overhear them, and I would say, Mother, you know they're right. But we still had to do it. But I think she got the last laugh because one son became a brain surgeon and the other became a rocket scientist. So obviously she had some intuition about what was right. But what a difference that made. And here's the important thing. I had the same brain when I was at the bottom of the class that I had at the top of the class. And I remember going up to Steve after a test. I said, Steve, how'd you do on the test? And he poked out his chest. He said, I got a 91. And I said, well, gee, that's too bad. I got 100. And I said, next time if you need help, let me know. But I was perhaps a little obnoxious. But gosh, it felt good to say that to that turkey. But I want you to think about something. I want you to think about the human brain, the most incredible organ system in the universe. Billions and billions of neurons, hundreds of billions of interconnections. It remembers everything you have ever seen, everything you have ever heard. It's there. It doesn't go away. It can process more than 2 million bits of information per second. You can't overload it. If you learn one new fact every second, which would be hard to do, but if you did, it would take you 3 million years to challenge the capacity of your brain. I mean, we have a lot to work with. And you think about how we start out. You have a female gamete, 23 chromosomes, a male gamete, 23 chromosomes, neither of which has the ability to become a human being. Fertilization occurs. They fuse together and you got a zygote with 46 chromosomes, a complete genetic map for a new person, not a part of the mother, not a part of the father, a brain that is developing at a rate of millions of neurons every day. Think about that. At the time that a baby is born, that brain is still developing at a terrific rate. That's why newborn babies sleep 20 to 22 hours every day, because that brain development. Brain continues to develop right up into the mid to late 20s. Think about that. That's why children, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old children, that's why they need parents. Because they don't have fully developed brains. They're not capable of making a lot of complex decisions. And I say that because there are segments of our society that no longer seem to possess common sense, that don't seem to recognize that children cannot make complex decisions, that have actually tried to work around parents and provide children with mechanisms to do things to their bodies without their parents' consent. That's what has happened to our society. Just a little bit of common sense is all we need. That's the reason that we developed the American Cornerstone Institute. Because when we came to the end of the last administration, I was ready to retire. You know, I had failed retirement the first time and ended up in government. I said, this time I'm going to get it right. But recognizing the direction of our country, I said I wouldn't have any fun just playing golf all day and cruising around the world, watching my country go down the tubes. So myself and some very capable people from HUD got together and we created the American Cornerstone Institute, looking at those cornerstone principles that made us into a great country. You know, we didn't rise from a ragtag bunch of militiamen to the pinnacle of the world by coincidence. It was because of what we believed, our faith, our Judeo-Christian values, which said, love your neighbor, not hate your neighbor, not try to disenfranchise your neighbor, not try to cancel your neighbor if they have a different yard sign than you do. Look how different those things are. And the cornerstone of liberty, of freedom, The thing that attracted so many people to our shores was the possibility of leading the life that they wanted to lead, and letting both themselves and their communities benefit from the hard work and talent that they possessed. And then the cornerstone of community, which was critical to the American fabric. You had small communities all over this country, 50 or 100 families. No other communities within 50 or 100 miles. Not only did they survive, but they thrived. Why? In many cases, they could barely even talk to each other. They had different languages. They understood a very important concept. It's called the common good. If you look at the writings of a lot of our founders, you'll see that phrase used a lot, the common good. Not what's good for just this one or this one or this one or this one, but what is good for the whole community. If it was harvest time and Mr. Johnson broke his leg, everybody else harvested his crops. No questions asked. It didn't matter what his political affiliation was. It didn't matter what his religion was. What mattered is that he was your neighbor and he needed help. Think what a difference it would make if we can get back to that level again. When you look around the world and you see the kind of conflicts that exist between peoples for really superficial reasons, and you worry that we could become that way in this country. We're already in the process. We have to learn the concept of the common good and the cornerstone of life, respect for life, from the womb to the tomb, all life, including the people out there on the street who are homeless. Many of those people are drug addicted. Many of those people are mentally ill. And just to take them with housing first and to put them into a residence doesn't really solve the problem. 90% of those end up back out on the street. You got to think beyond housing first. You got to think housing second. Why are they there? And housing third, how do you fix it? In the long run, that costs a lot less. I was talking to the head of the American Psychiatric Association. He said that the vast majority of those mentally ill people with appropriate counseling and medications would be functional. But they're not getting that. And the drug addicts, I guarantee you the vast majority of them, if there was a button they could push and they would no longer be addicted, they would wear that button out. But it's more complex than that. But we have to exercise the appropriate amount of caring for them. It's not that we don't have enough money in the medical system to take care of people appropriately. We spend $13,100 per capita per year on health care. That's more than many concierge practices cost. So where's all that money going? What do you need for good health care? A patient and a health care provider. Along comes the middleman to manage the relationship, and it takes out all the money and controls both sides of the equation. There are other systems. We're smart people, and I think we can do it. We also need to stop fighting each other. You know, you take something like energy. Why do we have so many people over on the green energy side who hate fossil fuels? Why do I have so many people on the fossil fuel side who say those green energy people are crazy? Neither is true. What would smart, intelligent people do? They would realize that we will at some point need sustainable, clean energy. They would also realize that we have become very effective and utilizing fossil fuels, and we have the cleanest air and water that we've ever had. And they would realize that we can take what we have to get what we want. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. Use what you got to get what you want. That's what smart people do. And we have to begin to talk to each other about that. You know, why do we have such great divisions on things like the border? Of course we need borders. Every country, every sovereign country has borders. But you have to be willing to talk about it, and lay the facts on the table, and think about the obvious. If you don't have borders and you have countries like Iran, who thinks we're the great Satan, and they want to destroy us, why wouldn't they send their operatives into those borders? And why wouldn't they be planning some devastating thing in this country? I mean, if they didn't, that would be malpractice, terrorist malpractice, and I'm sure they're not sitting here twiddling their thumbs. That shouldn't matter whether you're a conservative or whether you're a liberal. If you're using that brain with all those billions of neurons, that should help you to come to the logical conclusion about those things. You know, there's several areas I could talk about, but a lot of people think that it's all over, that we've had our time in the sun and we're going down, and they're very discouraged and they're just giving up. I don't think it's time to give up. It's time to understand what's happening, though. You know, if you look at the congressional record, January 10th, 1963, Congressman Herlong of Florida read in the 45 goals of communists in America. You'll notice a lot of the stuff that's going on today, like gain control of the public school system and the teacher unions so that you can indoctrinate the kids. Gain control of the media and Hollywood to affect the psyche of the entire nation. Remove God not only from public schools, but from all public settings. Get into the church and change the gospel to the social gospel. Defocus people. Drive wedges between children and their parents. All of these things are there. Make sexual perversion normal, natural, and healthy. All of those things are there. What that tells you is the reason that Khrushchev said to Eisenhower over 60 years ago, your grandchildren's children will live under our system. We think we won the Cold War. They had a long-term strategy. We are being manipulated. We, the American people, are being played like little puppets, doing exactly what they wanted us to do. The fact of the matter is, we are not enemies. Spell that out as an acrostic. We, W-R-A, not in enemies. E, wane. It's time to let the division and the hate wane. It's waxed for much too long. And we have to understand that we are neighbors and colleagues and friends, not enemies. Means we need to learn how to talk to each other rationally with the facts at the center of the table. Not with opinions, but with facts. And then to do the things that are helpful to us as a society. And that's what American Cornerstone is about. We have our Little Patriots program, which focuses on the children, teaching them the basis of our Constitution, what we are really about, what our real history is, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there is bad and ugly, but there's a heck of a lot more good than there is bad and ugly. That's what we really need to be concentrating on. Some people say, but we had slavery. It makes us uniquely evil. People who say that don't know history. Every society has dealt with slavery. There is more slavery in the world now than there has ever been at any point with human trafficking that's going on. So if you're concerned about slavery, get to work on the human trafficking. It's a really bad problem. But there is something that is unique about the United States and slavery. We had so many people who were vehemently against it that we fought a bloody civil war and lost a large portion of our population to get rid of the evil institution. That's what we need to teach our children. How do we learn from our mistakes and move forward? Don't run away from our history. Don't try to change our history. Because your history is the basis of your identity. And your identity is that thing upon which your beliefs are formed. And if you break that chain, you become a leaf blowing in the wind, easily falling prey to whatever winds are blowing. That's what's happening to our young people now. That's why you're seeing all this stuff going on at Columbia University and Harvard and Cornell. I'm not mentioning Yale. But I mean, that's what's going on. And it's starting at a young age. And we have to be just as aggressive in making sure that we give the children the right thing. So along with John Catsimatidis, we're going to be going over to the Police Youth League, giving out some of the books that we've created, Why America Matters, talking to the kids about their potential. That's something that we're doing all over the country. We have a cartoon series called Star Spangled Adventures, and a new one comes out each month, focuses on an aspect of our history. And they're very entertaining. They're a lot of fun. The kids love them. Every time you show them to a little kid, the next thing they're going to ask you is, can I see another one? And all of this stuff, by the way, free of charge. And you'll look at it and you'll say, how can this be free? Because we have wonderful underwriters. John's one of them, but we have underwriters all over the country who understand what we're going through as a nation and why we need to fight. We can give up or we can fight. But remember, this is America. America is different. That's why Alexis de Tocqueville came here in 1831, because the Europeans were fascinated with our country. You want to know, what the heck is going on? How can that nation, barely 50 years old, be competing with us on virtually every level? So he looked at our government and he was duly impressed by our separation of powers, our system of checks and balances, which is in great jeopardy right now, by the way. And then he looked at our business environment. He was duly impressed by how we encourage entrepreneurship, innovation. And he looked at our educational system. He was blown away because you could find a mountain man in the middle of the forest and the guy could read. And the guy could tell you about the Declaration of Independence. If you really want to be impressed, look at a 6th grade exit exam from 150 to 200 years ago. See what you had to know to get a 6th grade certificate in this country. You'll be blown away, particularly when you compare it with the man on the street interviews that you see on TV. And they don't know anything. I mean, you say, what countries born in the United States? They're like, Cuba, China. I mean, it must hurt to be that dumb. But, you know, remember, every country that becomes socialist, that goes down that Marxist trail, they first dumb down the population. You see that dumbing down occurring in our society, and that's why we have got to get back to honoring education, to putting it in its right place, to teaching our children the right things. There's a lot of good stuff, but you can't just sit back and complain about it. You got to get in there and do something about it. And, you know, de Tocqueville, the last thing he looked at that impressed him the most, guess what? Our churches. And he was blown away by the fiery sermons that came out of the pulpits that gave a ragtag bunch of militiamen the inspiration they needed to defeat the most powerful military force on earth, that gave the people a moral compass for how to treat each other. And he concluded his 2-volume set, Democracy in America, by saying, America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. Thank you.